This is Connor Murphy. At one point in time, he was one of the biggest fitness influencers on social media and YouTube. Millions of people watched his videos, his public pranks, social experiments, and his famous fake shirt routine, where he would pretend to be somebody who just had an average body, and then he would take off his shirt and shock everyone with his physique. I thought it was kind of corny, but this kind of stuff blew him up. He built a humongous audience around fitness, aesthetics, dating, and just pulling pranks on people. But several years later, his content started to look almost unrecognizable. He transferred from being a fitness influencer to essentially being an online spiritual guru. He began talking about all the common woo-woo stuff: ego death, sexual energy, healing, yoga, and the staple of all spiritual, not religious influencers, Christ consciousness. And according to Connor himself, the clearest dividing line for that transformation was an ayahuasca ceremony he participated in May of 2020, and that he came away from the experience believing that he was God. He said that in less than a week, he had gone from being a spiritually frustrated YouTuber to someone with complete experiential knowledge and understanding of the universe. His videos went from taking off his shirt and pranking people to extreme fasting, taking ayahuasca on a live stream, hospitalizations, and increasingly difficult to interpret behavior. All of this coming after that initial ayahuasca experience. And then 6 years later, Connor died after reportedly behaving erratically and then jumping into a lake in Thailand and drowning at 32 years old. So this video is about who Connor was before ayahuasca and who Connor became after ayahuasca, everything in the middle, and how Connor's story raises a much larger question about psychedelics, spiritual experiences, and the commercialization of ayahuasca, as well as the increasingly popular claim that through ayahuasca we can awaken the Christ within all of us. So Connor began uploading videos at around 2016. His early videos focused more on aesthetics, fitness, body transformation, festivals, dating, and public reactions to his physique. My guy was shredded, and he became incredibly successful. His main YouTube channel gained over 2 million subscribers, and his vlog channel over 1 million. But behind that successful public image, Connor later said that he was depressed and spiritually dissatisfied. According to his own account, an attempted robbery in 2018 pushed him towards meditation and Buddhist practices. And after a breakup in 2019, he started experimenting with psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin. Connor seemed to be searching for something. He had the body, he had the money, he had the attention, but apparently none of it had given him any deeper meaning in life. And that's important, because this ayahuasca ceremony didn't just enter into his life as someone who never showed any spiritual interest or never messed with any psychedelics. Connor was already searching for this awakening. He was already dissatisfied with life, and he was already using psychedelics in pursuit of something greater. Then, in May of 2020, Connor participated in an ayahuasca ceremony in Joshua Tree, California. Now, for those of you who are unaware of what ayahuasca is, it's essentially a psychedelic brew traditionally associated with indigenous spiritual practices, mostly in the Amazon. But it has made its way throughout the Western world and is no longer in a way tied down to just an ancient spiritual tradition. Ayahuasca has become a full-blown business. Retreat centers market ayahuasca using beautiful jungle footage, luxury accommodations, emotional Zen-like music, dramatic testimonies, and use buzzwords like plant medicine, trauma healing, rebirth, breakthrough, and of course, awakening. And we all usually hear from influencers about their success stories and their experience with ayahuasca. It's like the cool thing to do now if you're a social media influencer or a celebrity. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who reports an amazing experience and positive results is lying for the sake of the machine. Many of them may have sincerely been helped in one way or another by this experience. And there's also research suggesting that ayahuasca may have therapeutic potential under certain circumstances. But may have therapeutic potential is very different from the claims that we hear from influencers and testimonials from retreat advertisements. I used to be in sales. I know how important the testimony is to the sale. And preliminary research is not the same thing as proving that a commercially operated spiritual retreat can safely heal trauma, depression, addiction, anxiety, so on and so forth. Those are enormous and anecdotal claims. And when people making those claims are also selling access to the experience, we should at least be willing to ask some questions. And as of right now, the public conversation around ayahuasca is very one-sided, because the people who receive documentaries and podcast interviews and millions of views are of course going to be the people saying, oh yeah, this changed my life. While the people who come home confused, destabilized, paranoid, detached from reality, or in need of literal professional help generally don't become the face of the industry. Their stories are usually treated like unfortunate exceptions, or we hear excuses like they didn't prepare correctly, they didn't go into it with a positive mindset, they chose the wrong facilitator or shaman, they resisted the medicine, they failed to surrender, they were not spiritually ready for the experience, or they failed to properly integrate the experience they had. So when an experience goes well, ayahuasca gets the credit. When an experience goes terribly, the participant is the one who gets the blame. And I'm not suggesting that there's like a coordinated conspiracy to hide every negative experience. The problem is much more simple than that. There is money attached to the positive experiences. Retreat centers need testimonials. Facilitators need people to believe that they have the answers to the questions that people are asking and possess access to healing and spiritual enlightenment. Nobody builds a profitable retreat by advertising someone like Connor Murphy, who went on a retreat and then came home and was hospitalized. Stories like that get swept under the rug. One specific ayahuasca organization reportedly grew into a multinational operation that claimed at its peak to run 1,000 retreats for approximately 30,000 customers a year. It developed a training academy, a media department, a travel agency, a streaming service, and eventually its own cryptocurrency. Now, whatever someone thinks about the potential benefit of ayahuasca, that is not just some ancient spiritual ceremony. That is an international commercial enterprise selling you an experience. It's basically like the Hard Rock Cafe with psychedelics. Well, I'm sure there's some psychedelics at many Hard Rock cafes too, but that's besides the point. But here's what the marketing does not show, and what you'll rarely hear an influencer say about ayahuasca. A large global survey found that 55.9% reported some type of adverse mental health effect in the weeks or months after consuming ayahuasca. Those effects included things like disturbing thoughts, feeling disconnected or alone, and seeing or hearing things. Around 12% of respondents said they had to go seek professional help. Now, to be fair, most people who responded to the survey and reported these kind of effects still believed that this was somehow part of the healing process of growth and integration. But that detail raises an important question. What happens when the belief system around this drug teaches people to reinterpret every negative effect as proof that the medicine is working? Confusion and hearing and seeing things becomes confirmation that it's working. Paranoia and fear are now just trauma leaving the body. Disconnection from reality is viewed as enlightenment and ego death. And a breakdown becomes a breakthrough. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Once every negative outcome can be reinterpreted as a spiritual process that leads to progress, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize when somebody actually needs help. There's also an enormous variation on how different retreats operate. In 2026, a study of 49 publicly advertised psychedelic retreat organizations found substantial differences in participant screening, medication policies, staff training, emergency preparations, and safety practices. That doesn't mean every retreat is reckless. Some organizations seem to make a serious effort in screening participants in order to reduce risk. But we have to be aware that the word retreat does not equal and automatically mean controlled clinical treatment. A beautiful website, spiritual vocabulary, a facilitator or shaman wearing a spiritual robe do not guarantee that anyone who is present is qualified to recognize a dangerous medical reaction to ayahuasca. And then there's another part about these retreats that they don't tell you. One ceremony almost never remains one ceremony. They want you to keep coming back. And on each trip, you're consuming ayahuasca multiple times throughout multiple days of the trip. One analysis collected from 35 different retreat centers serving more than 9,000 visitors. Those visitors participated in over 35,000 ceremonies. That means that it averages out to several ceremonies per visitor. And repeat customers is something that each retreat facilitator is hoping for. If you get healed in one ceremony, you never come back, and they never get to make any more money off of you. And then there's people that I personally know who have felt the need to go back over and over and over again. Not because ayahuasca is as addictive as some opioids or alcohol, but because they're always searching for the next breakthrough. And they think that ayahuasca can help fix whatever it didn't fix the last time they went to get their fix. Now, I'm not claiming that everyone who takes it will create some sort of dependency. I'm just pointing out the patterns that we see. And a physical addiction is not the only way that someone can become addicted to something. They can become dependent on the experience of revelation or even the emotional intensity of the experience. They can become dependent on the belief that they're somehow advancing spiritually by going over and over again. They can also become dependent on the community surrounding the experiences. You make friends at these events, and then you become dependent on the facilitator or shaman, and they become your gateway to the divine. And then there's people who just convince themselves that if they just do it one more time, they'll finally get the breakthrough that they've been searching for. Just one more time. And you'll finally achieve the ever elusive carrot at the end of the guru stick known as enlightenment. And if you're one of those lucky people who has a horrible experience, and then the blame for that experience is pinned on you, you may feel obligated to come back to have the good experience that everyone else is talking about. So you see how easily this can become a cycle. Anybody who knows somebody who has done ayahuasca usually knows somebody who has done it more than once, if they can afford the $6,000 and a trip to Peru. From a business standpoint, this kind of structure is extremely convenient. A person who believes they need 5 more ceremonies is both a testimonial, a recruiter, and a repeat customer. And this is exactly why the ceremony is marketed this way. The ceremony is marketed as a doorway, but they don't tell you that people will spend years and years and years to repeatedly walk through that doorway again and again. And Connor Murphy's story is so important because it does not fit the pretty packaging that these retreat centers and influencers are pushing to the masses. Connor said what his first ayahuasca experience produced was something called ego death, which is something that anyone who is chasing enlightenment is trying to achieve. Within less than a week, Connor went from being a spiritually frustrated influencer to someone who claimed to completely understand the deeper truths of the universe and what underlies our reality. Think about that. 1 week prior, he was searching for answers. 1 week later, he believed that he was in possession of the complete knowledge of all reality and had become some sort of enlightened spiritual teacher. That's not some minor change in religious opinion. That's a complete rupture in someone's understanding of himself and the world around him. And the videos that followed reflected that rupture. Connor began to upload videos titled "Enlightening My Best Friend" and "Failing to Enlighten My Parents." He was not merely sharing a new belief. He apparently believed that he had awakened to something that everyone else around him was still too spiritually blind to understand. He also uploaded a farewell video that exposed his address and alarmed many of his viewers who feared he might harm himself. Connor later said he called 911, disguised himself, wandered around Venice Beach, and was eventually detained and taken to UCLA Medical Center. He said that he remained hospitalized for more than 2 weeks. On May 30th, Connor uploaded a video titled, "Yes, I'm alive and I'm sorry." In that video, he admitted that he had not been right in his mind, but he also attempted to reframe this as performative. And that tension is pretty much what followed Connor for the rest of his online career. Was he genuinely revealing what he believed? Was he having a mental health crisis? Was he performing? Was he trolling his audience? Or had the lines of those things become so blurred in Connor's mind that he can't even tell the difference himself? The following month, he began a 40-day fast that he live streamed. After that 40-day fast, he lost a lot of the muscle that first gained him his popularity. And from this point on, his content moved deeper and deeper into spiritual and metaphysical territory. He even began to speak about Jesus, but not Jesus and Christianity as the church historically taught it because, they're not enlightened. And Connor's videos started to have titles like, "I am God." What is God? A non-religious explanation. The real meaning of Jesus' teachings. He also collaborated with other spiritual influencers like Aaron Abke, whose content centers around Jesus from a non-dualistic New Age framework, someone I was actually supposed to debate. So in this new Jesus mystical framework, Christ is treated less like a unique person and more like a state of consciousness. Jesus becomes one enlightened master among many, someone who supposedly realized his inner divinity, and that same divinity exists in all of us. According to this interpretation of Jesus' teachings, it's not that humanity sinned against God and Jesus came to reconcile us back to God. The problem is that we've just forgot that we are God, and we just simply need to awaken to our own divinity. Problem solved. It uses Christian words, but completely changes the meaning of those words. Christ consciousness doesn't mean teachings of Jesus just simply because the word Christ is in there. I'm actually in the process of writing a book on this, so if you want to learn more about that, just drop a comment below. But anyway, this is apparently the realization that Connor came to. Connor's relationship with ayahuasca didn't end after the experience that preceded his hospitalization. He went back. Almost exactly 1 year later, he uploaded a video titled, "I took a mega dose of ayahuasca and filmed my reaction." He later claimed that ayahuasca didn't have any effect on him anymore because, get this, he had achieved such a high level of consciousness and spiritual awakening that psychedelics no longer worked on him like they did on everyone else. Now, he could just be trolling, and maybe he didn't take another dose of ayahuasca, but let's just take his claim at face value. The fact that the drug didn't produce the expected experience was not treated as a reason to question the belief system. Instead, it became evidence for the belief system, evidence that he achieved a higher level of consciousness. And this is one of the dangers. Everything becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. A powerful experience means you're having an awakening. No experience at all means you're awakened. People agreeing with you means they understand and they're awakened as well. People who disagree with you are low vibrational and their ego is resisting the truth. There's almost nothing that can disprove it. Connor's original experience did not become a warning to him. It became incorporated into his identity. His psychedelic experience appeared to confirm that he was spiritually advanced, and his belief that he was spiritually advanced gave him a reason to return back to psychedelics, even though, according to him, they don't work anymore. It's a self-reinforcing loop. In the following years, there appeared to be periods where Connor returned back to more conventional influencer content. He started making music, he filmed festivals, he did comedy and content related to performance optimization and golf. So it wasn't like this straight line where everything became progressively worse every single day and Connor was just completely out of his mind. There appeared to be periods of greater stability. That being said, though, some of his final content continued blurring the line between satire, performance, self-godhood, and instability. Even his normal content looked a little off. One video he posted was RIP Elon Muscular, and it included the phrase obituary pending. And there were also clips of Connor saying that he was absorbing the spirit of Elon Musk. Now, to be fair, he described a lot of this content as satire and performative, but because of his documented history and his own self-admissions, a lot of his audience couldn't tell exactly what they were watching. Is he playing a character? Is he losing it again? Was he being genuine, or is it a combination of everything? That ambiguity had actually become a defining feature of his public persona. Then, on July 7th, 2026, police in Thailand responded to reports of Connor acting erratically at a luxury property that he had been renting. According to the reports, he had damaged parts of this property. He was outside in the neighborhood, apparently agitated, and then when police arrived, he jumped into a nearby lake. He continued swimming until he appeared exhausted, and then he tragically disappeared beneath the water. Divers later recovered his body approximately 20 meters from shore. Police reported finding 2 unused syringes. I would assume that this is for his performance enhancing, probably peptides or something. They also found unidentified white pills. I would assume that's the same thing. And investigators are still investigating the circumstances surrounding his death. So do I believe that ayahuasca is directly responsible for his downfall, eventually leading to his death? I don't know. But Connor himself described that ayahuasca ceremony as the moment that changed everything for him. And it's also the exact moment that Connor went from just being a normal guy doing some corny influencer fitness pranks to somebody believing that he is God, getting hospitalized, and then having years of erratic behavior. That doesn't prove that everything that Connor did after the ayahuasca experience was caused by the ayahuasca experience, but it does make the ayahuasca ceremony the clearest publicly documented inflection point in his entire story. Now, an ayahuasca experience doesn't need to be the direct physical cause of someone's death for us to take its consequences seriously. The important question of this story to ask is, what changed after Connor believed that ayahuasca had shown him the ultimate truths about reality, himself, and the universe? By his own account, it changed how he understood God. It changed how he understood Jesus. It changed how he understood his own identity. It changed how he understood his family and his friends. It became the foundation for an entirely new spiritual persona. But here's the thing. An experience can feel spiritual without being true. An experience can feel profound without producing genuine wisdom. An altered state of consciousness is not the same thing as receiving revelation from God. You cannot assume that simply because something felt more real than ordinary life, that it must have shown you ultimate reality, especially if this comes after taking a drug. Your perception has been chemically altered. That explains why the experience feels different. It does not prove that you traveled to another dimension. It does not prove that you contacted spirits. But even if you did contact those spirits, what foundation do you have to interpret whether or not those spirits are lying to you about who you are or telling you the truth? The intensity of an experience does not authenticate the interpretation of that experience. And the message that we can awaken the God within us is not a new message. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The first spiritual temptation recorded in Scripture was not that human beings should stop believing in God. It's that they would become like God. But the gospel offers something different. You don't dissolve your ego through psychedelics. You don't need to pay thousands of dollars for a ceremony. You don't need to unlock hidden levels of consciousness. You don't need to return again and again and again, hoping that the next psychedelic experience will finally reveal who you really are. And you don't need to convince yourself that you're divine. The biblical Christ is not an energy. He's not a frequency. He's not an altered state of consciousness. He's a person who entered history, died for our sins, and physically rose from the dead. Christianity doesn't teach that salvation is discovered by digging deeper into yourself. It teaches that salvation comes from outside of us through Jesus Christ. And although that's not something that the spiritual, not religious community likes to hear, those are the true teachings of Jesus, and you don't need plant medicine to understand them. Now, bringing it back to Connor Murphy. Connor is not just some internet story. He was a human being. He had family, friends, people who loved him. His death should not be treated as entertainment or an opportunity to mock someone who was clearly struggling. But Connor's story can remind us that mystical experiences can feel beautiful, overwhelming, and completely convincing while still leading us further and further away from reality. We shouldn't blindly trust every spiritual experience just because it feels good. We need to test everything, be sober-minded, and if you encounter them in one of these experiences, test the spirits to see if they're from God, because feeling spiritually awakened and actually knowing the truth are not always the same thing. Pray for Connor's friends and family as they grieve through this situation. And if you know anyone who is into this ayahuasca stuff, maybe share Connor's story with them. So hopefully they can avoid traveling the same road of spiritual deception. All right, guys, God bless. I'll see you on the next one. And watch whatever video YouTube is putting over here.